operation with sign numbers. We're going to be working with sign numbers. To start off, we want to define what an integer is. Integer is the name of positive and negative whole numbers. When we think of integers, we can use the number line. Now remember, the number line starts with 0, and on the right are 1, 2, 3, 4, and they are positive numbers. Positive numbers are our counting numbers, and positive numbers do not have a sign attached to them. When we see a number and there's no sign, we know it's positive. Negative numbers are to the left of 0 on the number line, and negative numbers will display a sign of minus or negative. So our negative numbers are to the left, and we will see a sign attached to a negative number. These are our integers. Our integers are made up of negative numbers, 0, and positive numbers. One key note is that 0 is neither positive nor negative. The double negative property is when we have a negative of a negative number, it is a positive value. A negative or a negative sign means it's the opposite. So when we look at this, we're saying the opposite of a negative A will give us a positive A. And again, a positive number, we do not include a sign with it. So if I had a negative 7, that means that it's a positive 7. Next, we're going to define absolute value. Absolute value is the size of a number with or without the negative sign. The symbol are two vertical bars or lines. When we have two vertical lines, we are working with absolute value. So when we think of an absolute value, we think of distance a number is from 0 on the number line. So if I'm given -7 and I want to take the absolute value, again, the absolute value will be two vertical lines. That indicates that I am taking the absolute value of a number. To evaluate that, if the absolute value of a -7, I want to know how far off -7 is to 0 on the number line. We know that it's a positive 7 or 7 units away. So when we think of absolute value, we're thinking about a distance, and distance is always a positive value. Just like the absolute value of positive 7 will equal positive 7. So when you're evaluating an absolute value, you want to find the value that it means. So if it's a negative, it comes out as a positive, and if it's positive, it also comes out as a positive. The answer needs to come out of the absolute value for it to be a solution. The first rule that we're going to work with adding sign numbers is the adding rules for the same signs. When they're the same signs, add the numbers and keep the same sign. So this is very important. We're familiar with positive plus a positive will equal a positive answer. We've seen this many of times. 2 plus 2 is 4. 2 is positive, the other 2 is positive, and the answer is going to be positive. It's when it's negative signs or a minus sign. When we have a negative minus a number, we have the same sign. Negative and minus are the same thing. So if we have a negative minus a number, we have the same sign. So we're going to add the two numbers together and we're going to keep the sign. So we're going to do an example here. We see 5 plus 4. We're familiar with problems like this. They're the same sign. I know that 5 is positive because there's no sign in front of it. And I do the addition here. Again, they're same sign. 5 is positive plus 4. Plus means we have a positive here. We end up with 9. We keep the sign. It's positive. And remember, positive numbers, we do not write a sign with it. So the answer would simply be 9. Now in this case, I see a -7 minus 4. These are the same sign. And again, negative sign will be in front of the number. So I know that this is a -7 and a -4. Because they are the same sign, I'm going to add the two numbers. And again, this step right here is just something that you need to understand, not something that you're going to consistently write. But when you have the same sign, I want you to think in your mind, I have to add these two numbers together. I add the two numbers and I keep the sign. So in this case, I end up with a -11. Now, notice here that I have that rule, that negative, negative. So before you start doing the arithmetic, get rid of double signs. And in this case, that double sign will change to a plus. So it's really important that when you have a double negative mixed into a problem, before you start doing the arithmetic, you change the negatives, double negatives, to a plus. So in this case, you see that we have two positive numbers. I'm going to add the numbers together and keep the sign. And in this case, the sign is positive. Therefore, there will be no sign with my solution. Pause and try. So this is the same sign, negative, negative. I add and I keep the sign. I end up having a -5. Now we see we have an expression inside the absolute value bars. Now when you have an expression inside the absolute value bars, you have to simplify the expression first before you take the absolute value. So in this case, I see inside I have the same sign. It's a -9 minus 8. That means I'm going to add the two numbers together and keep the sign. So I end up having inside the absolute value bars a -17. Now I need to take the absolute value. Once you get it to be one number, then you can do the absolute value. So in this case, the absolute value of a negative number will come out as a positive value. So we end up with a +17. Now be careful, because when you have absolute value bars and you have a negative on the outside of the absolute value bars, that's not the same as parentheses and a negative. It's not a double negative. So the first thing you're going to do is you're going to evaluate what's inside. You're going to get that expression inside to be one number. So again, I see same sign, so I'm going to add and keep the sign, and I'm going to end up with a -12 inside the absolute value bar. Then this is not the double negative. I need to do the absolute value first. So in this case, I'm doing the absolute value of a -12. I end up getting a +12, and then I attach the negative that's on the outside of the absolute value bars. So I end up with a -12 as my solution. So be careful with double negatives and a negative of the absolute value, because they're not the same. Pause and try. So you see in here I have a double negative inside. I need to change that to a plus first. Then I do the absolute value, or do the addition, and I end up with 23. And then I take the absolute value of 23 and I attach the negative. Pause and try. So here you have the same sign. You add and keep the sign. You end up with a -29. When you do the absolute value of a negative, it comes out as a positive. Now the adding rules for different signs. When we have different signs, if the signs in front of the numbers are different, you're always going to subtract the numbers and use the sign of the bigger number. Now the key thing here is, whenever you subtract numbers, you always have to subtract the smaller number from the larger number, even if the larger number has a negative sign. And then you determine what the answer sign would be based on the bigger number. So if the bigger number is positive, our answer is going to be positive. This is something we're familiar with. 3 minus 1, that equals positive 2. When the bigger number is negative, my answer will be negative. So let's see what that looks like. So in this case, I see a negative 9 plus 4. They're different signs. I see that they're different signs. When they're different signs, I know I have to subtract. And again, I need to subtract the smaller number from the larger number. So in this case, I'm going to end up subtracting 4 from 9. So I end up getting 5. At this point, you need to make a decision. Is that 5 positive or negative? And it's based on the higher number. And because 9 has a negative sign with it, I end up with a negative 5 as my solution. So it's very important to make that decision in your answer. When you're working with different signs and you see double negative, you always want to get rid of the double signs first. Very important. So in this case, I get rid of the double negative. I know a double negative is a positive, so that's going to change to a plus 3. And now I see different signs. When you have different signs or opposite signs, you're going to subtract and keep the sign of the higher number. And again, I have to subtract the smaller number from the larger. And once I've done the subtraction, I'm making a decision. The higher number is negative, therefore my solution is a negative 3. So it's very important that you think through the process when you're doing the addition and subtraction of opposite signs. Pause and try. Again, you get rid of the double negative here and you end up with a plus 8. And you see you have different signs. You're going to subtract and keep the sign of the higher number. And in this case, my higher number is positive, so I end up with a positive 3. Pause and try. So again, it's different signs. You're going to subtract and keep the sign of the higher number. My higher number is that negative 14, so I end up with a negative 5 as my solution. Pause and try. So we have different signs. We're going to subtract and keep the sign of the higher number. The higher number is positive, so we end up with a positive 11. Pause and try. So you have that double negative. Change that double negative to a positive. In this case, we subtract. We keep the sign of the higher number. The higher number is negative, so I end up with a negative 8 as my solution. Now, when you have a multi-step problem and you have double signs, the first thing you want to do is get rid of the double signs before you start doing the arithmetic. So I'm looking from left to right, and I always work from left to right. So I look from 7, and then I have a plus minus 12. So a plus minus means that I have a minus 12. And then I bring down the negative 3, and I see I have a double negative. And remember that double negative will change to a plus, so I end up with plus 8. Now that I get rid of the double signs, I'm going to work from left to right. So I look and I see I have 7 minus 12. 7's positive, so I have different signs. When you have different signs, you need to subtract and keep the sign of the higher number. So again, I'm subtracting 7 from 12, and I get 5. And because my higher number is minus or negative 12, I put the negative sign with my solution. And I'm bringing down the minus 3 plus 8. And now I'm getting that negative 5 minus 3. I see I have the same sign. Same sign means I add and keep the sign, so I end up with a negative 8 plus 8. And now a negative 8 plus 8 equals 0. So again, get rid of the double signs first, and then work from left to right, thinking of the rules. Pause and try. So in this case, I want to get rid of the double signs. I end up with a negative 23 plus 17 minus 9. I work from left to right. A negative 23 plus 17 is a negative 6 minus 9. Same sign, add and keep the sign. My solution is a negative 15. Now we're going to work with the valuation of algebraic expressions. So we're going to do an example here. We want to evaluate the expression for the given value of the variable. So I'm given this expression 8 minus j, and it's asking me to evaluate when j is equal to a negative 6. So I'm going to take the expression and I'm going to plug in the negative 6 into j. Now, when I plug in a negative, I like to use parentheses so that I can see double signs. And in this case, I have a minus negative 6, and that is a double negative. And double negatives need to be changed to a plus. So it's very important that when you're evaluating, you substitute the number in with parentheses if it's a negative, and then you can see the double negative. And then I do the arithmetic here, and I see it's the same sign, so I add and I keep the sign. And because it's positive, I have no sign in front. So when I evaluate the expression 8 minus j, when j is a negative 6, my solution will be 14. Let's do another example. We have this expression. We're asked to evaluate n minus 6 when n equals negative 2. So I'm going to plug in negative 2 into n. Now in this case, because n is the leading variable, I didn't use parentheses because there's no sign in front of n. So I end up with a negative 2 minus 6. Again, same sign means I'm going to add and keep the sign. So in this case, my solution would be a negative 8. So when I evaluate negative n minus 6, when n is negative 2, my solution will be a negative 8. Pause and try. Again, you see here, you plug in a negative 3, you have that double negative, it changed to a plus, and you do the addition, and it's a positive 14. Pause and try. You plug in the negative 9, you end up with same sign, you add and keep the sign, you get a negative 16. Pause and try. In this case, you get that double negative changes to a plus, and you see you have different signs. Different signs mean you subtract and keep the sign of the higher number. So you end up with a negative 5.